Welcome to episode 50 of the Comfort via Discomfort podcast, where we are creating a mentally healthier world, one open, honest, and vulnerable conversation at a time. I'm your host, Adam Beaumier, and I can't believe we're already at episode 50. Like, I can, but I can't. Like, it just seems like yesterday that I launched this thing, and all of a sudden, a year and a half later, and we are at episode 50. It's been a pleasure to bring you an episode each and every week this year. And in episode 50, I can't think of a better guest than to bring you the story of Tia Wolfe. Tia and I met a few months ago. She is a mental health podcaster who specializes in emotional and trauma healing. You can find her podcast, Life with Tia Wolfe, on all podcasting platforms. Her and I kind of did a podcast swap. So she was a guest on my show and I was a guest on hers. My episode on her podcast will be released later this year or early next year. So keep your eyes out for that. In terms of Tia's story, like I said, she's a mental health podcaster now. She specializes in emotional and trauma healing. She's also a life coach. But as you have guessed from all the stories on this show, it hasn't always been that way. Tia grew up in a dysfunctional household where she was practically acting as a mother to her mother from a very early age. She also went through a few dysfunctional relationships as well when she was growing up. But all of these experiences have melded together to make Tia who she is today. And today, she is very passionate about speaking up about mental health issues and about helping other people work through their trauma and work through their healing. So in this episode, she talks about all of those topics and more. If you enjoy this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member to share the insights with them. And also please consider leaving a review. It would go a long way to support the show, and we would really, really appreciate it. As always, all of the links to find Tia online, including her podcast and any other resources that she mentioned in the episode, are down below so that you can easily access them. Alrighty, enjoy. Alrighty, welcome back to the CVD Podcast, where we are creating a mentally healthier world, one open, honest, and vulnerable conversation at a time. I am extremely excited to have Tia Wolfe on today's episode. Tia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to get into your story because there's a lot of stuff that we need to get into. I'm just going to say it up front. We've been talking for like half an hour already about a variety of topics. We were like, man, we should have hit that record button a while ago. But it's been so nice to catch up with you. It's been a little while since we caught up. We met back in I think we met back in the end of March, right? Podfest Global. Met a lot of people from Podfest, which was awesome. And we really connected very quickly on the topic of mental health and having like difficult, open, and uncomfortable conversations. And we're like, I got a podcast, you got a podcast, like let's make some episodes, let's make this happen. So really, really excited for you to be here today.
Thank you. And I love the fact that we're twinning. Our chairs are matching. You guys don't get to see this probably, but we have matching chairs. We have very similar stories in life. So yeah, let's get started.
Yeah, everybody on YouTube will see the matching Emerge chairs. And they're the same color too, right? They're the purple ones? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
although
so
I
funny.
guess the
That was
sunlight is...
all good. That was like the first thing that when we connected on video the first time, we were like, you actually picked it out. You were like, do you have the same chair as me? I was like, yeah, I think so. Thanks for noticing.
Yep, exactly.
But yeah, just finding any way to connect with one another. Anyways, yeah, let's get into things. I'm really excited to get into your story. There's some things from your childhood that we want to talk about, just in terms of like mental health and having suicidal thoughts quite early in your childhood, to being in an abusive or toxic relationship, moving to Texas in 2020, and really finding like who you are, and then starting your podcast in 2022. There's quite a few topics to get into with you today. I'm really excited to try and get through all of them. But before we get into your story, why don't you tell me a little bit more about who you are, and tell the listeners about who Tia is as a person and what you do for work, and then we'll go from there.
Man, you put me on the spot already.
I told you I was going to do it.
Well, I guess I can start from childhood. Like you mentioned, I did have suicidal thoughts very early in life. And if it wasn't for my mental state of like, okay, I've lived X amount of years, I'm already here. And I can't just live for myself. I have to find another reason to live. I wouldn't be here today. So that's like a big thing of mine growing up, was like, I don't live for myself, which to think about it now is kind of like, okay, well, and I'm going to just jump straight in. It's causing a lot of like identity issues, which is, we'll talk about this later, but hence why I would need it. I moved to Texas to work on myself. But going back to my childhood, I grew up with no father. He left when I was 3 months old. Don't know the guy, don't know where he lives. And my mother pretty much taught me to hate him. So growing up until I was probably 18, 19 years old, I had this, I wouldn't say hatred, but like I had a very big dislike for men. And it's ironic because I grew up a tomboy. So I had a lot of male friends. But what I didn't realize until later was that they ended up being some sort of emotional support for me. And that kind of got me through life. I didn't have a lot of female friends. And the ones that I did, I thought they were like my best friends. But turns out they just didn't have my back. They were talking about me behind my back. And some of the people, I find out from other people that like they were jealous of me. They just saw me a certain way. So a lot of times people saw me a certain way from what I really was, and they just ran with that idea. And I'm kind of going a little bit between like childhood and like adulthood, but there's similar themes. And I just find that like it wasn't until my mid-20s where I recognized that people didn't see me for who I was. And no matter what I said, no matter what my intentions were, they were already set in their ways of how they saw me. And if it wasn't for me choosing to find myself and get to know myself, because one of the biggest themes I had growing up was people pleasing. And for some of the listeners, if you didn't have both parents growing up, or like they were there but they didn't support you emotionally, you start thinking that it's your fault for everything. And my mother, being a narcissist, she made it that way. And I didn't know better because, when you're super young, you look for your parents for guidance. And I only had one. And she wasn't really much of a parent either, because she would leave whenever she wanted to. And I would come home and I would ask grandma, like, where did my mother go? And she's like, oh, I don't know. She'll call when she arrives, wherever she's at. And that's how I lived a lot of my life. And that's if she wanted to take me along or not. Because sometimes she did. And I did move around a lot growing up. A lot of people thought I was a military kid because they're usually the only ones that move around all the time. But that wasn't the case. My mother was very unstable. And most of the time when people get upset with like family members, they just leave the house, right? My mother left like the entire state. And, that caused a lot of abandonment issues. Not to mention when you didn't have a father growing up and your mother was blaming you, blaming him, and she was always the victim. It messes you up.
Just to jump in a little bit here. So, and you had told me that you grew up without a father, obviously. And you almost had to become a mother to your mother. Like, what did you mean by that? And how did that sort of happen? How did that take place?
So my mother wasn't educated. She decided to leave school in second grade. And for people who don't know, I'm Chinese. So she left school um, in China at second grade, and she thought she was doing the right thing of like giving up school to go work hard to bring money back in.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who know a little bit of Chinese history, that was during the time frame that the communists just took over, and all of the wealthy people all of a sudden were jailed or like fined heavily. So we went from a decently well-off family to all of a sudden we're working really hard. And this is way before my time, but I'm speaking on behalf of my family history.
Mm-hmm.
And so she grew up in that era of like, okay, she had a poor household and she had to work hard for grandma to provide. And none of her sisters had to go through that because they were all older and she was the youngest one. And I understand why she made those sacrifices, but like she was just always that type of person that was very willful, which I'm guilty of. But she always did things her way and she thought it was her way or the highway. And so, because she didn't have an education and she didn't speak any English, I believe at like 6 or 7 years old, I started having to translate. So, as soon as I was able to start going to school, because English isn't my first language, um, it's not even my second language, it's my third language. And they just kind of used me as a translator. So they would take me with them to interviews. And it's not just my mother, it's also my aunt as well. They just saw me as the perfect, like, they try to mold me into a way that wasn't true to me. But early on, I just, there's a lot of like old traditions that you have to keep up
Mm-hmm.
as a woman. And one of them is like, you have to be obedient. You have to listen to your parents, especially as a female. You have this set idea of, you're being raised to have some level of intelligence. You go to school, you go to college, you get a good job, but your ultimate goal is to get married and have kids and provide the family household for your husband. So before that, you have to be really good to your parents, respect your elders, make sure that they're taken care of. And, this is really hard to talk about, but when you hear your parent or my mother say that I only chose to have you because I need you to support me when I'm old, you kind of see it as you are not valuable
Mm-hmm.
unless you do just that.
Yeah. Do you remember like when your mother like first said that to you?
I was really young. I don't know exactly, but probably as soon as I can comprehend that complexity, probably around four,
Hmm.
5. I mean, it's, around the same time I started having depression. It was like all these feelings of like, why are you here? You're here to serve your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how old people are before they start processing what that was, but for me, I always had like my own compass, and I just felt like that didn't sit right.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel like I came here to just, what's the word, like, support my elders and be the typical housewife and like support my husband, although I do have traditional values,
Mm-hmm.
so those things are true, but that's not the only thing that defines my worth.
Right.
But over time, I didn't have a mind of my own to think about because my mother wasn't capable of doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
She just needed me at all times. She can't even cook. Like, I started cooking at 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like that in America is like, oh my God, that's so dangerous. A kid like touching fire because we had gas. stoves rather than like electric. So like if a child just puts their hand over the fire, you can get burnt. They
Right.
can, they just get hurt. And forget all of the chemicals that you can get access to under the kitchen cabinets.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like I learned to cook for myself. I learned to shower at a very young age without like getting hurt. I just took care of myself while my mother was out working 2 jobs, which is very common for immigrants, I believe. Immigrants. But yeah, that's where it started, where I kind of became the parent. She just didn't have a mind to process complex things.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I would have to do it for her.
Yeah. And you mentioned that like, there were some things that your mother said that made you feel like you basically had no value. Like you were just there as like something that was like to be used however other people saw, right? That you were just like, oh, I'm just like something to add convenience to somebody else's life type of thing. And you mentioned that you first sort of comprehended that around maybe 5 years old. And you also told me the first time that we chatted that was the time where you started to become depressed and have suicidal thoughts. And for a lot of people that are listening, I'm sure they're like, whoa, like how, like, are you sure at 5 years old, that you had suicidal thoughts? Like that's a really sort of complex thing seems like a complex thing to like understand, right. And to comprehend. So do you want to take me through a little bit of like what your life was like then, and like how, like, what was it like going through, I guess, depression at 5 years old? Like, what did that mean? And how did you, I guess, like looking back at it, how did you know that you had like suicidal thoughts at that time?
So at that time, I didn't know what depression was. I just knew that I wanted to end my life. And so I'll explain like the scenario. And I would cry a lot. As a kid, it's also shameful to cry. So I would just hide in my bed and like pull the covers over me and just start crying, but like without sound. So I'll just have like tears running down my cheeks, and I would just cry until I put myself to sleep. And if I ever heard anybody come into the room, and that's when I don't share a room, because half the time I was sharing a room with either my cousins or my grandma. So even then it was like I never had like a safe zone for me to just process my emotions.
Right.
And in the Asian culture, and it may be changing now with like the younger generation, but as a first generation here, you don't talk about your feelings. There's no such thing as like, okay, I'm here for you, talk to me, what's going on. It's you suck it up. Like life is so hard for us. You guys have it easy. Just you shouldn't have any stress. Like you're in a first world country, you are more privileged than all of the people that we know. You should be blessed and thankful that you are here and not in China, having to work on the farms, having to be submissive, but also like you get beat in school in China. I don't know if that's still the case now, but that was definitely the case when I was growing up. And so when you hear a lot of like negative things like, oh, you don't have a right to your feelings and emotions, over time you just kind of like suck it up and like shove it down.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you don't feel anything, because as a kid, like you're so pure, you know what you're feeling. And I don't know how much people comprehend those things, but I do remember. So I was living in like a house at one point, and we had 2 floors, and I would always sit by the second floor window with the window open, and I would just like look at the sky, and I would just think to myself like, I could just jump off and out the window, and maybe I can end my life this way. And I didn't think anything was wrong with it, because I just hated my life. I grew up poorer than poor. And what that means is that, there's government assistance, but government assistance even have a minimum income per year for you to be able to receive that kind of help. and we didn't make enough money, so we couldn't get any sort of government help. So I just grew up not having anything. I had one stuffed animal growing up. And I may have had like one building block just to learn my ABCs.
Mm-hmm.
And you would laugh at me for this, but I thought a electronic translator, so it went from like Chinese to English, was like fun. Like that's my childhood. Like we
Yeah.
didn't have anything.
Right.
So I didn't know better.
Mhm.
I just thought like everybody was struggling like me.
Right.
But there was something like deep inside. I was just really upset, really sad. And my mother would cry to me.
Mhm.
She would just tell me all of her problems. And this is also part of mothering her, I guess, because, you know, adults shouldn't be coming to kids, talking to them about their problems. And, you know, there's a set expectation of like, it's your fault. You should be fixing this. Like, if I didn't have you, my life wouldn't be this way. And that was something she said a lot of. Like, she was like, I wish I just killed you when I gave birth.
Wow.
And when I think about it now, I guess she also had like postpartum depression, but I didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know, at one point when you get tired of hearing that, you're just kind of like, sorry.
Okay.
You're just kind of like, okay, well, you might as well just kill me now. Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, like why are you keeping me around?
Yeah, my life is a freaking living hell.
Yeah.
So like,
Did you ever tell any family members about how you're feeling at all?
So in my family, you can't talk about how you feel. You will just be like, essentially you would just have your story rewritten to the fact of like, again, logical of like, okay, we brought you here. You have no reason to be upset.
Right.
So like there was never a safety for anyone to express that.
Yeah,
at least in my family.
Yeah, that's a really unfortunate point that you bring up there. Because I mean, like I talk a lot with some of my colleagues about like psychological safety. We even talk about it like in the workplace now and how like important that is, right? And I mean, as a child, like that should be number one, right? Like in terms of creating a safe space for your children to be able to operate and express themselves and whatnot. So not having that, I mean, like you said, anytime that you would bring something up, like it would just get thrown in your face again, and it would be like, oh, you're ungrateful. You're not actually like these problems are nothing. Like you have no idea what we've been through. So totally understandable that you would never want to bring something up. You also mentioned in a previous time that we chatted that, you know, as you were getting older, other family members, like relatives, they would put you down, but also ask you for help, and which can be a really conflicting thing. And I mean, just describing it sounds a little confusing. So do you want to take me through a little bit of like, as you were growing up, like what started to happen, and how did that sort of, what kind of effect did that have on you?
So let's reference my mother a little bit more.
Sure.
I only know my mother's side of the family, and she had, I believe, 3 sisters. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 3 sisters and 1 brother. And the brother just was, you know, he's the only male. So he's kind of like removed from the drama from the sisters, but also like men are valued higher in the Chinese community. Now it's different, but back then men carry the household name. You know, having kids, you bring in a wife, not you're raising a woman to be given away kind of thing. So because of the way my mother was, and everybody like made fun of her, she's like the youngest one, and divorce is looked down upon. So she was the only one who got divorced. And I'm not saying like, okay, my aunts and uncles, they were happy either, but they just decided to stay together just to avoid the shame or for the kids. So they're not happy either. Like they're sleeping in separate beds. And I know nowadays it doesn't mean anything, but back in the day, if you're sleeping in separate beds, that means you guys aren't really together. It's
Right.
just
Like
to
you and
save
your
face.
if you and your spouse are sleeping in separate beds. Yeah.
I mean, now it's more common. It doesn't mean like you guys don't love each other. It's just, time frame, sleep schedules, work, there's so much more. But back in the day, yeah, it's shameful to say that. You don't sleep in the same bed with your husband, with your wife. It's not good. But because of the way she was super unstable, they would always say like, oh, she's going to grow up just like her mother. Like useless, pathetic, unstable, can't keep a man. But like the one thing she has going for her is her looks. And I remember my oldest aunt always saying like, you just need to give up school, give up everything, and just go back to China and run for pageants. Like you have the beauty for it. And since I valued intelligence a lot, and I think part of it is because my mother was so incapable that I just made it a thing where I don't want to be anything like her. I don't want to be reliant on other people. I don't want to be unstable. I made it a thing for me to always learn, to grow, to help myself, put myself in better scenarios, and never put myself in a position where I cannot help myself and I gotta rely on somebody else. So yeah, it was like a lot of insults, but also like, it's backhanded compliments as well. But the thing is, they don't speak English.
Okay.
My oldest aunt was blessed with 3 sons and a daughter, so she was okay. But the second youngest sister, she had sons who were 2 and 4 years younger than me. And she would always ask me for help because I was the older one. I was also responsible for the 2 sons of hers when I did live with them because I was the older one. So that meant I was more mature. That meant I knew more. So I have to guide them the proper way. And so that's like part of the help is that like I have to do like household duties like at a very young age, because that's just what is expected of women. You're supposed to take care of the household, and here we go. Like we got 2 sons, and they would never say they're spoiled, but like they are spoiled. They don't know what suffering is, like the same way I do anyway. They had 2 parents, they are both hardworking, and obviously like men aren't playing a big role in a Chinese household, so like they just provide and that's it. Like they don't do the emotional, they don't guide you how to be a man or a woman or anything like that. But like still, the fact that they had both parents makes a big deal, and they never had to move. They lived in the same household. They got all of their finances taken care of. And I had to take care of everything that like my aunt and uncle needed. So they never had to be bothered for help. And this could be as basic as like booking hotel rooms. They would never ask their sons to help them. They would be like, oh, they don't know anything. And I'm like, but you always talk about them like they are precious gold, that they are smarter than me, better than me. And, it might be also like a man to woman mindset of like, okay, because men are more valuable, that they can just degrade me in that sense. Or the fact that they don't want to accept the fact that I'm capable enough to do all of these things, because it, in some ways it is competition, right? Like, is my what's the word, are my kids better than their kids? Because they always want their kids to be better, especially for sons. They want the son to be better than the daughter always, because like at the end of the day, you're going to be given away. You're not going to be part of this family. If this woman is brought up to be given to another household, like it looks bad for you that you didn't do well with your parenting for your kids. So like it's always a degrading thing. And I feel like just in general, whether it's culture or not, women do get degraded a lot because we are valued based off of our looks, not of what we're able to do. And again, like a lot has changed. Time has changed and we are no longer like that. But back in the day, first generation, it was very much like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there's been quite some changes that are very positive. And yeah, it's interesting that you kind of go through like all of those things, because it's unfortunate that you were sort of in that position, in the sense that like you were responsible for everything, but also like looked at as less of a person, even though you might have been more intelligent and capable than other people that you were taking responsibility for, which is a really
Mm.
interesting dynamic. And I think that, as you've mentioned before, that it really did have some effect on sort of like your mental health and how you viewed yourself. And I know that, you've described growing up before, to me at least, as when you were younger, you were always trying to be somebody, you were trying to be a person that other people wanted, basically, instead of like trying to be yourself or trying to find who you are. And I know that kind of started a little bit in your teenage years. So do you want to tell me a little bit about that, and how that's really sort of played out over your life?
Yeah, so in terms of not being able to be myself, it's mainly because I was just so tired of arguing and fighting
Mm,
for, having a voice in the house. Because no matter what I said, it was always spin back towards me. And, as a kid, you don't understand manipulation. Although
yeah.
some kids are pretty smart about that, but like I always had good intentions. I wanted the best for everyone. And that's always been me, no matter how old I was. But I also was very willful and like strong minded growing up. So I didn't just back off from any argument, any way of like them just
Hmm.
interpreting me wrong. But when you do it for years on end, like just nonstop, because you can't leave your house until at least 17, 18, when you go off to college. So like over time, I just became avoidant
Mm,
of arguments and fights. The other thing is that because I was responsible for my cousins as well, whenever they got into trouble, it was always me
mm,
because I was the oldest one. I'm the more mature one. So
yeah.
I should be responsible and I take all of the blame, even if it had nothing to do with me and I was never around. And that also happened when I was in my early 20s and I moved back to Boston. Oh, and for those who don't know, I'm originally from Boston.
Yeah, yeah. So originally from Boston. When did you leave home, or stop living with your mother, and move away to college, and how did that start to change things? And if so, how did it start to change things?
I couldn't escape my family per se when
Okay.
I went to college. Um, my mother had a huge influence on my college application, and
Hmm.
actually, I didn't know where I really wanted to apply to because college was never a thing I thought about. And maybe your listeners will beat me for this, but I feel like not everybody needed a college degree. And especially if you don't know what you're doing or want to do,
Hmm.
I think it's a waste of your time and money because you're just kind of like blindly
Hmm.
trying to explore. But like at the same time, you have a set path, and
Yeah.
usually people graduate in 4 years. If not, like then you're looked down upon as like a delinquent or
Hmm.
like you're not really smart or whatever. So like
Yeah.
I feel like for those who don't know what they wanted to do, they should just start in the workforce. And I definitely wanted to do that. I wanted to earn my own money and just leave.
Mm.
But I couldn't do that. And I realized that if I was going to run away, because I've thought of running away as well, I didn't know where I could go, and I didn't understand how to utilize the internet in that sense of like, oh, well, there's shelters, there's places you can go, and a little bit more of like a background. So the divorce papers actually said that my father had 50% custody of me,
Okay.
but my mother always told me that she was only one.
Mm.
And I mean, like from 0 to 17, you can't really understand how to read legal documents, right?
Hmm.
And I never thought to ask her, oh, let me see your legal documents to see if that's actually true. So she always told me that, hey, if I ran away, they're gonna send me off to a family, and those people may treat you even worse. So I'm just like, man, my situation is terrible, and it's a possibility that I can be worse off.
Yeah.
So then, like, I can't run away. And I've thought of running away to my friend's place, but then, like, they're just going to call my parents and, like, send me back, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and then it's going to be even worse.
Yeah, because then you get, this is child abuse, but you get ass beatings in Asian cultures. So, so I wasn't able to. And then my mother, during that time, I think she like got into an argument with like my aunt, and she was like, okay, we're moving to New York, like you have to pick a school in New York. And I remember I wanted to go back to Chicago. So the previous summer, like we moved to Chicago, and I was really depressed. I think that was like my second depression, because she moved me the last year of high school, and I would have to start all over. And I had good grades, but in Chicago, like the good schools, you have to enter at like ninth grade. So you would have like exams that you would take, and you would have to pass like a certain um
like a competency test or something.
Yeah, just to see where you're placed, and that's where you get to choose. So like they were gonna put me in a public school that was very dangerous, like gun violence and just violence in general was very high there. And I was just like, you moved me here without thinking about my future just because you can't stand your sister. And I was upset. So I would starve myself. I would eat once a day. I would not leave my room. And I was there like the entire summer. They were trying to get me enrolled in school. And then finally I couldn't get enrolled in a good school. So like my mother was like, okay, we'll move back. And it's like, why do we have to like experiment and try this when somebody already said no? And that's the one thing about her, is that she doesn't take no for an answer. And like, that's great in some scenarios, but it doesn't always work out in your favor.
Right.
Okay, we're going to cut this a little bit, but I forgot your question.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We were starting to talk about like when you left for college, or if you did, and how your mindset started changing, or how your life started to change, because you basically were describing a scenario where you were just like you were being blamed for everything, and it didn't matter if you were the more intelligent or more capable one, or if you were trying to actually better yourself. It was just you were always kind of like belittled and blamed for things. And so I was wondering like when that sort of started to change, and you started talking about college, and you were like, oh yeah, we moved to New York, and and my mother basically picked where I went to college.
Okay. Yeah. Now, all right, back in.
Boom.
Yeah. So cycling back, that's how I ended up in the college that I went to. I actually enrolled in 2 colleges in New York, but one was upstate and one was in Long Island. And my mother, because she didn't speak English, we had to be in Chinatown. So there was only one option. And that was the school out in Long Island. That was like 45 minutes away. And she actually moved with me. So I never got to really escape her. And then it's even funnier because like we moved into a apartment complex like down the road from the school. So it was like maybe a 5-minute drive. But then she blamed me for the fact that I chose the apartment complex when, for me, it's like, it's all about conveniency. I don't want to live somewhere where like it's gonna take me an hour to go to school. I mean, like we're already leaving Boston. Now you want me to commute an hour in a state I don't really know to go to school because of you. And she didn't understand leases or anything, so like she ended up breaking the lease because we ended up having bed bugs, which, by the way, during that time, and I don't know if it's still happening, but New York and bed bugs during that time was terrible. So I was bitten up. I thought they were mosquito bites, but that scarred me because we ended up being sued, going to court. And during that time I was planning to become a lawyer. And oh man, this is gonna be really bad, but the court system isn't what you think it is. I mean, I'm sure people know that now,
Right.
but like during that time, you think that like court is fair. It is not, because I got threatened by the judge. He was saying, if you don't drop this, this is going to go on your record. And considering you want to be a lawyer, you're not going to pass the bar having this on your record.
Wow.
So I was just threatened, essentially, like my future is going to be ruined. And, you know, like I actually to this day don't know if that was true or not, but it deterred me from going down that path.
Yeah.
I was just like, if this is how lawyers are, you have to lie, you'll have to, you know, it's essentially corrupt. I don't want to be in a place where I have to do corrupt things because it goes against my morals, but because it's my job, I have to do it. And I'm not like beating, you know, all the lawyers out here. Like, if that's what you like to do, that's fine, but it just was not right for me. But anyways, straying off path, going back to the story, sophomore year, I was able to escape because I was like, listen, I need to be at school all the time. I went from school to work, and that was all around the school area. And she wanted to be right by Chinatown. So I was like, listen, I'm going to dorm. And dorming was great, except like I had a roommate, and she was spoiled rich brat. And we were so different that at one point, I was like ready to like change rooms because it was just like very, very crazy of like the situation. And I think that was my first taste of like freedom. And it was nice because I realized how structured I was. I never strayed off of what I wanted to do, but I did realize, now that I'm looking back at it, I was very lost. I just didn't know I was lost. Lost in the sense of like, I just wanted to be with somebody because I didn't know what it felt like to have that proper support, somebody who was there for you. And I was picking all of the wrong people.
Yeah.
All of it. And yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned that you kind of like got out of a toxic and abusive relationship in 2016. So did that start during your university years and afterwards, or what's the story behind that one?
So that one was like the last year. Okay. So I actually graduated early. I graduated in 3.5 years. So the last semester was when I met that ex of mine, and before that I've had not the best relationships either, but by far this one was the worst. And this is, I'm gonna explain one of the stories that can show you how messed up my mental state was at the time, and had no idea that it was wrong at all. So the guy I was dating, I think it was like end of freshman year. It was like insane because, okay, this is really bad. A lot of TMI, but during high school years, like I was kind of an ass.
Me too. Don't worry. It's all good. My mother would be the first person to tell you that.
So I would like unintentionally break people's hearts in high school, and that kind of like started in college as well. But then there was this guy who said like, hey, I'm not down for you dating like 3 other men at the same time. By the way, I'm not sleeping with these people.
Right.
It's just, you know, dating. I just need to clarify that because nowadays it's like a whole different world. You know, when you're dating multiple people, it means you're sleeping with all of them. So, but yeah, he like essentially in some sense like gave me an ultimatum, and that was like the first ultimatum I've ever had in my life. So I was like, by the way, anyone who's ever experienced an ultimatum, don't do it. Like, if somebody gave you an ultimatum, you gotta walk away, because there's always a red flag to that. Somebody who truly loves you, somebody who truly wants to be with you and respect you, will never give you an ultimatum and would not ever see you in like the proper light if they were to give you an ultimatum, because they're doing it from selfish reasons and not so much about you, it's about them. But going back to the story, I dated this guy for like 3 months or maybe 6 months. I don't know. I had really, really short term relationships. I was never able to have a relationship over 6 months. I always thought like I just got bored and maybe I just needed just like constant stimulation. And I'm still trying to figure that out really. Like where did it really come from? But he was the first person I lost it to. This was like 19 or 20. So I thought I was gonna marry this guy because otherwise I wouldn't have given it up. I believe that, you know, no sex before marriage. And that was very much the case when I met him. But he was kind of messed up because so he told me that we were not together after a couple months. It was like, you know, actually there's a girl I like in college and I'm gonna go pursue her. And my dumbass said, go ahead. There was nothing wrong with that in my head. And that's how messed up I was. I didn't realize how messed up that was that I said it was okay.
Yeah.
So he actually did it. And then he came back. He was like, oh, yeah, so she has a girlfriend, but now we're friends. And I, again, still didn't see anything wrong with that. And there came a point where like he said it wasn't working out and I was very attached to him. And if anybody knows, like when you have sex with somebody, there's bonding hormones, especially for females. So you like won't see this person clearly. I mean, once you have sex with like so many people, that kind of goes away. But like your first one, you just get attached to, whether you actually like them or not, you don't even know because the bonding hormone is kicking in. So I was so in love with this guy that when he wanted to break things off, I was like clinging to him. I was desperate. And I never saw myself as that type of person because I hated clingy people. It like freaked me out. But I was doing that to him. And then he got into a car accident one night and he called me and I immediately was there for him. And we tried to make it work. And he invited me to his sister's wedding because his family made him. He didn't want to take me. And then they went to Canada for vacation. And on the way back, and we were still trying to figure things out. This was during winter break at this point. He called me and he was like, I need to talk to you. And, you know, that's never a good thing to hear. But I was like, okay, tell me. And he's like, no, I'll tell you when you come back into New York because I was in Boston at the time for winter break. And I was like, no, you're not going to call me and make me wait like 3 weeks to figure it out. He was like, we're breaking up, like officially. I met somebody in Canada and I'm dating her. And I was so heartbroken. Like I was crying nonstop. Like I was such a mess. And that was all I could talk about for probably a month to anybody who was listening. And okay, you know, talking about it now, like now that we're in the mental health era, all of that was all red flags. And if you had any awareness, you would know this is not a relationship you would even get into.
Right.
But this was like 2012. And I didn't know better. I finally broke away from my mother for the first time. I just didn't want to be controlled. I wanted to have my own decisions. Clearly, I wasn't making proper decisions because I was like messed up from all of the people pleasing I started to do during my childhood. But also not having that emotional support, not having any sort of support. I was just holding on to whatever I thought I could have had.
Yeah.
And so this leads into my abusive relationship, which there was one other boyfriend in between these two, but it was so short term that it didn't really matter. Well, it does. If he's listening, I don't want him to think like I discredited
We know
him.
what you mean. Don't worry.
But yeah, so this led to the eventually toxic and abusive relationship I was in. This happened senior year, and actually it's almost like a sort of like a cheating situation kind of thing from the previous ex, but it wasn't really. I So I don't really have this awareness of like needing to protect myself from men because of the fact that I was a tomboy. It's normal that, we hung out till really late. We never did anything, super innocent when that was still a thing back in the day, right? So I went over to I think he was living off campus. So I went over to his room. He was in a house with like 6 other people, and like we were supposed to work on something together. But instead he ended up kissing me. And to me that's like cheating. Because I still was with the other guy and I felt so bad. I had to break it off with the other guy. But I mean, it was also a hot mess with that one. But anyways, I made it a commitment to myself that I'm going to stick past a 6-month relationship. So I was staying for all of the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Because there was like red flags from like immediate get-go.
You're like, I'm just ignoring everything. I want to make it to this like 9-month mark because I've never done it before, and like I want to prove to myself that I can stick around.
Yeah, I thought I was a problem. And that was something I learned like throughout childhood because it was always my fault that I just programmed in my own brain that it's always my fault when something's wrong.
Yeah.
So even going into relationships, that translated.
Yeah, of course.
Into that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so like the first red flag happened when I got sexually harassed in New York City. I was out for dinner with one of my friends and we went to this Italian restaurant in the West Side. I don't remember the name. I think like my brain really tried to block that out because I was so stunned that it happened. And the situation was just that like we had dinner, the owner was around and like he sat next to me. He started getting really handsy, was like touching my legs, and then was like his arm was around my neck and like forcing me to kiss him. And I was very uncomfortable. I was trying to push him away, but I never actually said no because again, it was like that programming from childhood that like you can't say no. You have to just accept what everyone's giving you, and the authorities, the higher ups, the elders, whatever you want to call it, is always right. You're always wrong. So like I was so conflicted, but there was like no response physically. So I was just very uncomfortable trying to push his hands away, and like I excused myself to the bathroom. Mind you, my friend has also, she didn't have the best upbringing as well, so like she didn't know what to do either.
So yeah, it's an uncomfortable situation for everybody. And I mean, like, you pushing away, like, to some sense, is like you saying no, is like non-consensual, stop that sort of thing. But obviously I know what you're saying, where you're like, I was so conflicted, I just didn't know what to do, so got excused myself to the bathroom. And then, like you said, it's an awkward situation for everybody. Your friend didn't know what to do either.
So I was just trying to close the check and like get out as soon as possible. And I mean, I was still trying to be like well mannered, so like I still paid and like tipped and all of that, when like really at that point you could have just walked out and like go to the nearest police station, but I didn't do any of that. And this was like right after I just graduated from college, so I went straight back to his place. And first of all, I couldn't get a hold of him. Like he was knocked out, asleep. And the door was locked, but he knew I was coming. And like his TV was on, and I was knocking for a whole hour. So like, I just went through.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. So when you were at the restaurant, this was the owner that was doing this stuff to you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't the person that you were dating. It was the owner of the restaurant who was doing this stuff to you.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
Correct.
Understood.
Yeah. So when I went back to his place, that was like the first thing I wanted to talk to him about, was that I just needed some emotional support. I just needed somebody to be there and like make me feel safe. But I couldn't even get in for the first hour, and I felt bad because like he had a roommate right next to him, and I was knocking so loud. I was like, oh man, it's late. Am I going to wake her up? Like, am I going to get a complaint and get kicked out because he's not opening his door?
Yeah.
And eventually, somehow he like woke up, and I talked to him about it, and he kicked me out. He said we were done. he said he couldn't believe that I didn't make a scene. I didn't say no. I didn't beat him up. I didn't do anything. I just froze. And he was just like, I don't want to date a girl who can't stand up for herself.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's the last thing you want to hear when you just went through that.
Yeah, of course.
So I was crying. I went home to my mother, which didn't help, obviously. I just went to shower.
Yeah, of course. You went to somebody who would listen, of course.
Well, I didn't tell my mother anything.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I just went home.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there was no way I could talk to her about this because, again, it's going to be my fault.
That's
like,
fair.
oh, what did you do for him to want to touch you and all of that?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went home. I just like went and showered off, and like I just felt filthy.
Yeah.
I felt gross. I felt invaded. And again, it wasn't like I was like raped or anything, but like to endure that for the first time when like no man ever prior to that ever have done that to me, it's a shock. It's a violation. You just don't know how to feel, how to process it. Was it your fault? Which I was definitely thinking like, okay, it's my fault. I did something.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the next day. I was in real estate school at the time. There was this girl. She's one of my closest friends now. But at the time, like, I just kind of met her like a week ago, and I told her about it, and she freaked out. She like took me to the police station and filed a complaint. And I've never had somebody be there for me like that. And she was very like supportive and like vocal about things like this. But eventually the police station like dropped the case because they couldn't find anything, which is like, you know, that's kind of how it always works, which is why I didn't feel like I should have gone to the police station anyway. And they just kind of proved my point that they're not going to do anything about this, which didn't make me feel any better because it showed me that, hey, again, I'm wrong. I'm in the wrong. So that was red flag number 1. Should have been like, okay, left it alone. Second red flag, I was sick. I needed somebody to take me to the hospital. We eventually made up after this, but I needed somebody to take me to the hospital. I had to like beg him to take me to the hospital. And then the entire time I was in the hospital, he was complaining. I'm severely sick that I needed to be in the ER, and he's the one complaining about being there. That's like the worst thing you want to experience when you're sick. You just want comfort, or you just want peace and quiet. It was just like, I can't believe we've been here for 3 hours. I can't believe they're not doing anything. Like, we shouldn't have come here. I'm like, oh my God. But that wasn't enough for me to leave. And there's like a lot of chain of events that happened, but like the first abuse, I should have known. It was when I was really upset about something. And oh yeah, so I think this was like 2 years in or something. And I was already living in Boston at the time. And I visited him in New York, and this was a very common thing that I would have to be the one driving down to New York every single weekend to see him. And he would never come up. So that should have been another red flag, guys. Like doing long distance and you're the only one putting in effort. But I think like I left my car lights on, and you know, like if you left it overnight, your car battery is going to be dead. And it was really late at night. His mom told me like, hey, you need to go turn off your car lights, or your car's not going to be working for you to go back to Boston. And again, it's late. He lived in the Bronx. It's not that safe in the Bronx. He would not get up. I asked him if he would go and like turn it off for me. And he was like, no. And I asked again because, you know, it's like a safety thing. It's not really my neighborhood. And like, it's just like I didn't feel safe just going by myself. Like at the very least, go with me.
Right.
And he just wouldn't get up. And like, I mean, this was me getting a little angry. I took a pillow and like hit him in the head with it. But it's a pillow. Like, you know, people do pillow fights. But I was a little bit upset. And what he did, he got up and he like pushed me off the bed, and I slid across the room and I hit their cabinet. That was the only thing that stopped me. And that hurt so bad.
Yeah, I bet.
I don't know if I got bruises,
Wow.
but that should have been like, okay, I should have walked out, but I didn't. And I just endured it. So obviously, you know, when people show you something and you don't set your boundaries, you don't show them that you don't tolerate this, they'll continue and it gets worse every single time. And one year for his birthday, he was so upset that like he didn't like what I got him. Okay, so this is like entitlement at this point. But he didn't like what I got him. So he made me go book tickets to go on vacation. And that's what he wanted. But before that, we were on the way home and he was so upset that like we got into an argument in the car while I'm on the highway driving back to his place. And it got to the point that he literally tried to open his door while I'm on the highway so he can exit, which I guess like at that point he know I would have to pull over and stop. So I pulled over, he literally got out and started walking on the highway and I was like, I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah.
I can't believe this is such a scene. And at this point I'm begging him to come back in.
Yeah, of course.
Even though, you know, it's like, oh man, now I'm talking about it, it's like brings back memories.
I'm sure it brings back a lot. Yeah. So obviously talking about all this stuff brings up a lot of memories, brings up a lot of emotions. I mean, you're mentioning like being sexually assaulted and feeling like grimy and just like I want to, like, my skin feels gross. I've been sexually assaulted as well, so I know exactly what that feels like. And it's like, ugh, it's like you have the heebie-jeebies. Like, you need to completely cleanse yourself, and sometimes like once isn't enough. You need to do it again and again. And like in those moments, you just want somebody who's going to be comforting. You just want somebody who's going to sit down and try to understand, and somebody who will trust you, and somebody who will believe what you're saying. And the worst thing that can happen is to have somebody like literally kick you out. So, I mean, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And I can't imagine like what you're feeling at that time. But also, like you mentioned, there's so much trauma from your childhood that you just pushed it aside and went back to him. And this sort of stuff kept happening over and over again, these sort of like red flags. What I'd really like to move into for the last little bit of this episode is really like how you've gone from all of that to where you are now, because who I know you as is like the mental health podcaster and life coach. And the first time that we chatted, you shared like a statement, I guess I'll call it a quote, but you shared a statement of like what you do. And so I really want to understand how you went from like all of this trauma to where you're at now. So the statement or the quote that you said was, I help underdogs move past childhood trauma and wounds and the past so that they can get back to living the life that they've always wanted to live. And first of all, when you said that, I was like, this is awesome. Like, this is perfect. Like, I need you on the podcast, like, immediately, because it's important, right? And I know that in my own story, it's been a lot of healing from past trauma that is so motivating and inspiring. And I'm like, I don't want anybody to have to go through what I went through. And that's what continues to drive me to do what I do. And it sounds like you have a similar theme. And so after that abusive relationship ended in 2016, the next thing that you told me about was how you moved to Texas in 2020. And that was kind of a big wake-up call. So why don't you tell me a little bit about like how that happened, why that happened, and then we'll sort of get into the details of like from 2020 until the present day.
Yeah, so it's actually two different things that made me have this personality that I have now. And just to wrap up on that relationship, because it was a big reason where I needed to really check and see where my priorities are and all of that. So the big thing that made me decide that I couldn't be in that relationship anymore was when he gave me that ultimatum, because I moved out of my family's home into just a bedroom in one of my coworkers at the time, his house. And it was just like really cheap rent. He was just doing me a really, really big favor. because it got to the point like in my family that like I was seeing red, and like what's going to happen after, like either I'm going to be jailed or they're going to be jailed or like someone's going to die, because I couldn't take it anymore. And he found out because I never told him, because it would have been a very big problem, which it did become a big problem. He was like, since you moved out, you're either going to move to New York, we're going to move in together, or we're done. And I just like up and left my job at the time. I was working in finance. So just to spiral back a little bit, I left from wanting to be a lawyer to going into finance, because I was already going down the business degree path and I wanted to finish school early. So that happened. I moved in with him. 2 months later, we got into a huge fight. He almost killed me. He had me at a chokehold. It was over something that was, I guess it's a big deal to some people. He thought I was cheating on him. I wasn't. He was accusing me of cheating on him with a woman, which like, I get it. It's not unheard of if you're bi, if you become lesbian, but like he just didn't believe what I was saying. So he just kept beating me. And this happened when I was sleeping at like 7 a.m. He was getting up ready to go to work. He went through my phone, and like he often went through my phone, and like I just got frustrated. So I had my best friend like pretend to text me, just like, oh hey babe, and like, you know, girls call other girls
Of
babe,
course, yeah.
but like, man, he got really heated. I was already in the middle of like blacking out because I couldn't see anymore, and he's a pretty strong guy, so he had me at a chokehold. I was like lifted because I'm smaller than him. And like, if it wasn't for the fact that he finally realized like I was about to black out, and I don't know if it just like was timing or whatever, but I really couldn't breathe. I wouldn't be here today. And, you know, I didn't think to call the cops, but I did leave. I left, and I kind of disappeared. I stayed at one of my friend's place for like a whole month and a half to recover, because I had bruises all over my body. I had to rush to a eye doctor because my eyes were bleeding. And it was just like a whole situation. And like I was so numb to the pain that I just didn't process anything. I didn't feel anything anymore. I was like dead inside. And my dumbass eventually went back to him for one last time. As if that wasn't enough, I swore that I would never get back with him, and I did, like within half a year. And I wanted to give it one last try. Big regret, because I was getting my wisdom tooth pulled out, and I was drugged, like severely drugged. And I don't even know how I got home, because I asked him to take care of me in that sense of like, okay, can you just pick me up? And he was like, oh, I can't take a day off work. He works in finance. He can take a day off if he really needed to, but he didn't want to. So we got into a lot of fights during the time I had my wisdom tooth removed, and I was in so much pain, and like, you're supposed to heal and recover. I was constantly reopening it, that I was so afraid that it was going to like get infected. Yeah. And like during that time, he would just keep trying to take my car keys and like just go wherever he wants to go. Like he didn't want to take his car, and like it's my car, you know. But that was that. Like we got into a huge fight. I tried to kick him out of my apartment, and there was like all these legal issues that like because he was living with me for over 30 days in New York, like you can't kick somebody out because technically they're living there too. Don't know if the rules have changed, but eventually he moved out, and I went into a spiral of like darkness. Like I just like didn't know who I was. I can't believe I put myself in a 4-year relationship.
Wow.
Going through hell and back. And I swore off like dating, which well, I guess God has other plans for me, because during the time I said I'm not going to date anymore, I needed to find myself. I can't believe I got myself in this kind of state that I never thought I would have gotten myself into, because I was so adamant of like putting myself in the proper places where I could succeed, and instead I was putting myself in torture and pain, and it just wasn't good. And so since 2016, it was like a healing journey, trying to find out who I was. And like my last ex, which was 4 years ago, so the ex after him helped me out a lot in starting that healing process. But it was also when I found spirituality, because I was so desperate. I just didn't know who I was anymore. I was like, I'm willing to go to church. I'm willing to dive into astrology, which is now a big part of my life. I was very big on the sciences, so understanding how the brain works, how trauma affects your brain, just understand biology and like the hormones that gets affected, just like all anything you can think of to just like help me on some path. And astrology came in hand because I always knew my birth date, birth time, and all of that, because my mother would always say it to me. It's such an important thing. And it did come in handy because it reminded me of who I was. And I'm not saying astrology is for everyone,
Right.
but when you're lost, and I went to church, and church was great in the sense of like uplifting, but it didn't sit right with me because I had so many friends of different cultures and religion, and
Right.
like they all have their own right. And I was like, well, if everybody thinks they're right, why can't I just adapt it?
Yeah.
Why can't I just take things from each religion and culture? And I'm not disrespecting anybody's religion, by the way. Like, I respect everybody's religion, culture, beliefs, like whatever works for you, that's great. But for me, it was just one of those things that like, hey, everybody had different beliefs and I agree with all of them. Why can't I just adapt that into my life?
I'm with you.
Yeah, and astrology was also in my eyes sort of like a mix between spirituality and science, because there was like facts to every single sign, every single placement, house. And I don't push it on people, but for the longest time I was a big skeptic. And I just wanted to see if it was true or not. So I was testing myself. The more research I was doing, I did it with my friends that are willing to like give me that kind of info so that they can learn something maybe. So it's not just like, oh, your sun sign, your moon sign. It's like all of the houses, all of the planets, the placements, and how that affects your life as a person. And then there's transits, because like, in this current state of time, the planets are in different signs, different places than when I was born, and how that affects me differentiates throughout time. So that kind of helped me find a footing, because like when you're so lost, it was nice to see something that you resonated with, that you knew was always you, but you lost it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and honestly, and any glimpse of anything where it's like some sort of self-awareness or some sort of piece to the puzzle, it's like, ooh, there is something. Let me dig more into this.
Yeah, so that was one part of it. And the other part was my job. I realized in 2015, like I was starting to build my career in finance and I wasn't happy. Like I was making decent money. It wasn't that great.
Yeah.
I mean, like in Boston, it's really expensive, but it was decent. Like I was going up in the ranks a little bit. I try not to talk about income because I realize money is a very sensitive topic to people, but I was doing okay for Boston standards. But I wasn't happy. I just felt like there was something there that just didn't make sense to me. And when I moved to New York, I couldn't get a job. It wasn't that I wasn't capable, just interviewing was never my thing. And I couldn't, and I was talking to you about it earlier, is like, tell me more about yourself. Like, how do I even answer that? What part of me do you want to know? Like, how is this going to be relative to like the work we do?
Yeah.
You're not seeing any form of like productivity, efficiency, adaptability, like the soft skills. It's like everybody has a set way of like answering the same questions. And it's like you don't have a character. You're just literally a block by block.
Yeah.
And I got interviewed and rejected so many times that again, I just thought I was the problem. But deep down, now that I think about it, it was just like my heart was never there. But I did well. I ended up in a hedge fund eventually, and then a private equity firm. And that was like the last company I worked for. But as I continued on the financial journey to climb up the ladder, I was getting more and more unhappy, which like, there was like several layers of depression. It was kicking in more and more. And it got to the point where like I was so depressed in the hedge fund company at the time that I couldn't get myself to work. Like I just woke up like empty and I was so miserable. I was crying. I was just like, I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was very hard on myself for it. I was like, what is going on? Like, I've always been super efficient, trying to get things done, always trying to achieve things, my goals. I've always been that way. And now I'm just like not happy and nothing is making me happy. I just feel blank. And this is also part of like trying to find myself kind of identity, but like nothing mattered in this world anymore to me. I was just so checked out.
Yeah. Been there before.
But yeah, and I know you relate.
Yeah.
And that's where like we had, a deep commonality. But yeah, I just like kept going as much as I could because I was making decent money, and I was like, the days that I could go into the office I would, and this is way before like work from home time. And I didn't have a good rep in that company. People just thought I was making my illness up, that I was always sick, but she just didn't want to show up. But the thing is, like, I'm only offering to work from home because I wanted to still, complete my work for the team. Because I could just be like, okay, I'm not showing up. I'm not doing anything. You guys can take all of my work.
Yeah.
But I felt bad. So that's why I worked from home. And people just was like talking behind my back that like, oh, she just doesn't want to show up. She doesn't want to be part of the team, she's just lying. And it was like, oh, what's new this week? Like, what illness do you have this week? And it was just like, not anything you want to hear.
That kind of, I mean, that sounds like it would add to the depression and the anxiety and to like the almost like helplessness feeling. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm trying, even though I feel like shit, I'm doing these things because like, what else am I going to do? And I also feel bad. So I'm going to try and complete these tasks, and people are still, not trying to understand the situation. It's more just like, yeah, she's just making up a bunch of shit.
Yeah. And during that time when like anybody would want understanding and comfort, like I was just like essentially rejected. And you can't just say you're depressed. I mean, now you can, but this was like, I think 2017 or 2018. I don't really remember the time frame, but yeah, it was bad. There was a week that I couldn't show up to work at all. And that's actually during the same time where I'm starting to realize I had some form of anxiety. And mind you, I'm in New York at this time. So like it started getting overwhelming when I was doing the commute to work, and there was so many people, and like anybody who lives in New York knows that like you guys are just jamming each other in as best as you can on that train because you want to make it to work. But like everyone's miserable because everyone's just trying to get to work on time. And a lot of people need coffee. I didn't drink coffee. So like I didn't realize I was becoming more sensitive to energy during that time. And that was probably a big cause of my anxiety. But I passed out several times on the way to work because I was getting so anxious. It was stuffy, but like you can't just get off the train because then you're going to be late for work. And like every train for the next 2 hours is going to be the same. So you try to ride it out. And, it's a lot of back and forth. Like you can't just quit because living in New York, like you need income. There's no way you can just afford living there.
Right.
And I didn't have any roommates because like when you're going through that kind of like state of mind, the last thing you want to be around is like people.
Yeah. So what was it that caused you to move to Texas in the first place in 2020? COVID.
So I was working at the private equity firm. I actually just let me see. I'm thinking the time frame. I changed jobs in August of 2019, maybe. I may be mixing up the time because it feels like so long ago.
That's all right.
But so I just moved. It was actually a temp job because I was so desperate to get out of the hedge fund. I took a temp job, worked my butt off, got converted to full time in 2 months. I was really happy there for a while, but I didn't sleep. I was struggling with sleep. I have sleep issues where like I would go months without sleeping sometimes, and like I started noticing how much it like wore on my body. And once COVID hit, it was insane. I was working like nonstop all the time because the markets were going crazy, and I was still living in a 1-bedroom in Queens, New York at the time. So by December 2020, I was like, you know what? I just need more space because I'm eating, living, working out, sleeping, resting. Everything was in my living room.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know what?
I can relate to that. I was like the same thing when I was living in Boston for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? Don't know how long this work from home is. We've already been doing this for 9 months. Let me just move somewhere where I can get more space for the same price. And, I'll come back whenever the work from home ends. So that was my initial plan, actually. I didn't think too much of it, but I was also like, maybe since I'm going to go somewhere where I don't know anybody, this could be a good time where like when I am off work, I can like work on myself, just have some alone time, not have to answer to people, because in New York, there's always stuff happening.
Yeah.
So I never had that. And I didn't know I was going to be in Texas. It was kind of a random pick. It was good for, no income tax. And it was super cheap at the time when I moved. So that's how I ended up here. And then 2021 came. One of my friends came to visit me for his 30th birthday, and I was trying to get those days off. And they gave me a whole spiel about how I can't take off during month end and that I had to work. And they were like, okay, we can compromise and you can take half the day off. And that kind of hit because during COVID time, nobody took a day off. We were like on call 24/7 essentially.
Yeah. I was working online for working from home for a consulting company in Boston at the time. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It was nonstop. Yeah.
Yeah. They just thought like, okay, since you're at home, you're always available. Like you don't have anything else to do.
Basically on call. Yeah.
Yep. So that was like the first point. I was like, we never used any vacation days. Like the entire team never used vacation days during COVID. And that kind of rolled over a little bit to the next year. And I was like, you know what? I want to take like 2 days vacation. So I did that for one of my friend's birthday in March. So I thought I was going to be able to just for like 2-3 days in April. But then there was that talk and I was very unhappy. And what made it worse was like a month later, my coworker asked for the days off at month end. He got the same spiel, but he was allowed to have the days off. I was pissed. I was so pissed, and I don't know if it was because I'm not throwing in race or anything, but there's, in a financial field, white men still have privilege, and I was like the only only female in my team, first of all, and then 2 was Asian. But like, we had other teams that kind of oversee us too, so like there was females there, but like again, they were white females. So there is I don't want to say like it's very common or evident, and maybe that's not the reason why. Maybe, I mean, there could be a lot of different things. I don't want to get into it because we don't know. And I'm just, I don't want to accuse people of something that may not be true. But I was just very upset that I couldn't get those days off. And that's when I started thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm slaving hours, like, because there's a time difference, Central Time versus Eastern Time. I would have to wake up at like 7 something or 8 something. to be logged online at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I was just so exhausted because I couldn't sleep. But I didn't log off until like 1 in the morning here, which is like 2 a.m. in Eastern time. And that was like my day, 5 days a week. And I skipped meals because there was no such thing as lunchtime. Because again, 24/7 on call, couldn't make a meal for myself, couldn't do anything. So when I logged off, I would just sit on my couch and like process life. Like I was a dead skeleton. I was making a lot of money, but I was blowing it all off because I was so stressed.
Yeah.
I was just like, I don't have a life. I'm like a living corpse. And that kind of like became another depressive state where I'm like, man, is this really what I want to do? And I was like, yeah, but the money's good and all that. And you know,
there's
it's
always
kind
that
of like
excuse.
one of the yeah. And it's like the people aren't bad, you know, like it's a very
try to convince yourself to stay, right? Because like you're just like, yeah, but like there's this and there's that, and like then I'd have to change, I have to find a new job, I gotta meet new people, like all this sort of stuff. There's like all of these reasons to try and convince you not to change when you're faced with the decision, even though you know through and through that like if you stay here, like this is just gonna get worse.
Oh yeah, and I felt really bad because my MD really looked out for me. He took care of me. He always had my best interest at heart, and I just felt like I didn't want to let him down, which is also one of the reasons why I didn't want to leave. Like I had it really good and I'm like, man, I'm so privileged. Like how can I feel this way? But I was miserable. I really was. I wasn't sleeping at all. I was super stressed.
Yeah. It almost sounds like you had the narrative from your mom like in your head where like you shouldn't feel like these aren't real problems, like you should feel so lucky to be here, like this person's looking out for you, and if you go somewhere, like that's what it sounded like when you described that.
Oh yeah, I felt really guilty for even wanting to ask to like quit. And I remember like they were willing to work with me. They're just like, you know, maybe you should just take like some time off. Like not like I think there's like a medical emergency or something.
Medical
I can't
leave
remember.
or something.
Yeah, that they were willing to let me like leave for half a year. I would still get paid and I would be taken care of. And I was like, you know what? Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to milk a company for their money while I'm going through something and like, you know, come back and then be even more overwhelmed that like, oh my God, there's so much I have to catch up with and like so many changes and I'm like going through something mental and now I'm coming back to more mental stress. And I know they said like, you know, when you come back and you can't adapt, then you can actually officially quit. But I was like, you know what? I was just no longer like mentally there.
Yeah, the
That I was
energy
like, I need
too.
a break.
Yeah, you just energy sucked out of you. You're just like, I literally don't have any energy to do this.
Yeah, and you realize later, like when you start working yours, you realize that when you start working on yourself, you're burning a lot of energy, like whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, it's like all these things you're working on and you have to revisit things that are very traumatic.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, I'm gonna throw this in there, but we don't have to talk about it. You know, there was a point in time I also got raped in college, but you know, I don't want to go back into that when we're wrapping this up. But yeah, there's a lot that I had to process.
Yeah, of course.
And you're like trying to heal in like so many different aspects of life.
Yeah. So you said I mean, I don't want to brush off the thing that you just said about being raped in college. Obviously, that's a terrible thing that happened to you, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that. Had a similar experience as well, so it's just another thing that we've had in common in terms of our traumatic experiences. So yeah, that's definitely not something to like just completely ignore. I know that obviously we don't necessarily have time to get into it right now, but I do just want to say that I'm really sorry that you went through that, because that's a lot. when it came to the working environment that you described, and you said that you felt like a living corpse, and you finally made the decision to like leave the company, like, is that what it took? Like, what happened after that? You mentioned being like in a depressive state and feeling like a living corpse. After you left that company, is that when you started to put more energy like into yourself, into your personal development? Like, what did that sort of look like? And then how and why did you start your podcast in 2022? Because I do definitely want to give you some time to get through that as well.
Yeah, so honestly, I think my healing journey has already started during that
Mm-hmm.
time that I was feeling like I was a living corpse, and maybe that's why, like, when you start healing, you start realizing a lot of the things in your current life no longer serve you, no
Mm-hmm.
longer is working, and like you're just kind of torn between this new self that's now emerging versus your old self, which is what you've known for so long. So after I quit, I was kind of like thinking I was gonna start my podcast like a month later. I was like, okay, I'll give myself a whole month of break, just do whatever. Like, even if I don't do anything, it's still like recovery.
Mm-hmm.
But I started running into wounds and fears of my past, and one of those big fears was like being seen. I struggle with being seen. I don't want to be heard. I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be known. I don't want to do anything that like puts me in a spotlight. I don't even like going down the street and people staring at me. It's so uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like this is a wound of mine. Like growing up, it was like if there was any attention paid to me, it was always negative. It
Mm-hmm.
was somebody yelling at me, someone blaming me, or I'm getting my ass beat. So there was just like a lot of that going on, I guess. And I just, I don't really know like how much of it is added up throughout my life, but I just knew that was a big fear. And so I never actually launched until February 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me half a year, a little bit over half a year for me to start.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually recorded my first episode, I think like in April. And honestly, I don't remember how I thought of wanting a podcast, but I was looking at my receipts and I ordered a mic back in 2019.
Yeah.
So I actually had intentions of it,
Yeah.
but you know, like, so when you think about it, it wasn't just half a year of this
Mm-hmm.
fear. There was like a whole two
3
and a
years.
half
3
years.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years
Yeah,
of me.
I think I remember this because like this was another thing that we connected on, because it was literally the same time frame. Because like in 2019, early 2019, I actually recorded like 3 or 4 podcast episodes, and I had the full intention of like doing this then. And then like I got scared. I was like, oh shit, now it's like the real deal now. People are really gonna judge me, and I
Yep.
just like
Yep.
completely shut down. I was like, nope, not happening. And then it took me, and then other things happened, COVID, school, working, all that sort of shit. And I just push it off and push it off. But it was something that kept like going on in the back of my head. And then finally in April 2022 of last year is when I launched it. So like literally ideation in 2019, didn't
Yep.
actually release the first episode until 2022.
Yep.
So I understand that fear and how it can actually take a long time to actually do something that you've had in your head. So tell me and the listeners, like, what your podcast is called, what's it about? And then I'll ask you some questions about like how you got over the fear and where you're at now.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Life with Tia Wolfe. And actually, when I first intended on starting my podcast, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And the funnier part is that I've never listened to a podcast during the time frame. I was like, okay, I want to have a podcast. But one of the biggest intentions that I had was that I wanted to help people. And like the only way I could do that was like something online that can like expand to the entire world. But I struggled with that fear of being seen. But I feel like, you know, my entire life I felt like I was an underdog. And that's why like one of my quotes was like, I help underdogs move past their childhood trauma and, you know, move past the past so that they can get back to living the life that they always wanted to live. Because like everybody has dreams, everybody has goals, but like throughout life, you know, when you're a child, you're so innocent, you're so pure, you just know like there's nothing stopping you. But then as you continue growing up, your family, your friends, your relationships, your colleagues, even like teachers, guidance, role models, whatever you want to call them, social media, the TV, they all start scaring you. They start planting in ideas that you may not necessarily resonate with, but if you hear it enough, it starts becoming like a cycle in your own mind. Whether you are aware of it or not, that's up to you, but like it starts being programmed into your subconscious mind that like you can't do this because of this. Especially like one of the most common things I hear is that like people can't just quit their jobs, especially when they have family to provide. They have people that they're responsible for and they take care of. And, you know, my life has not been easy, but I realize like that's not a reason for me to stop wanting to pursue what I wanted to do. And obviously I am blessed enough that I didn't accidentally get pregnant and like have kids to like be responsible for. And like with my family situation, I've kind of removed myself from them in some sense. So like I don't really have that responsibility there. But I do believe that everybody has an inner fire, whether they have dimmed it out themselves, I don't know. But everyone has an inner fire that is telling them like this is what you're meant to do. And like I know people compare. They're like, okay, I'm never going to be as good as so and so. And so why even bother trying? But it's not about comparison. It's about you.
Yeah.
It's about fulfilling your own needs, your own wants. And because of that, then you are a happier person. Even if you failed, the fact that you tried will get you a little bit closer to achieving your goals and dreams. And even if it's not realistic, the fact that you tried, you gave yourself a chance is very important. And I feel like with everything happening in the world, everyone's just ready to like shut themselves down before anybody gets there. So then because people tend to project, whatever fears they have, they now bring it on to the next person and the next person and the next person. And then over time, no one's achieving anything besides like the typical 9 to 5, if even, or like you just got to work hard and make just enough to cover your bills and your living expenses and like survival. And it's like, come on, like I know it's hard and I know it's not easy for me to say this because it is hard work and a lot of people don't want to do that work. But, you know, when you stray away from who you've always been at your core, you get lost. And that's one of the things that I want to get back to is like, that's kind of my life. I've been going through so much, realizing that I've had all of these wounds and traumas, and still to this day, like I am not healed. And I think at this point, nobody is ever really healed. Whether they acknowledge that they have problems or not, that's a different story. And everybody has like their own problems. It's not to be compared to anybody else because like problems are problems. It doesn't mean someone's problem is more or less than the next person. It's not a comparison. Like everybody has that threshold. And ultimately, I just want the world to be happier. I think there's a lot of wasted potential because of things said and drilled into other people's minds. And that's where my podcast was built. It's a mental health podcast. It's to help people raise, or it's to help people be aware that like, hey, there are all these things that are happening in the background and you may resonate with it. I use myself as an example of the things that I've gone through, the experiences and lessons I've learned and how it's helped me. And in no way am I saying, you know, my way is the right way for everyone, because It's not. And, you know, I've talked to friends who've gone through similar trauma, and the way I'm doing it doesn't work for them. Like, it requires a lot of willpower. It requires a lot of like strength and like willing to break down and share vulnerability. And that was one of the things I was really afraid of with my podcast, was that I'm sharing such intimate details. And even in this episode, I'm sharing my deep stuff that only my close friends know. And now the world's gonna know someday, I guess. But if I'm able to help people with like my life lessons and what I've been through, just so that they can learn something, and even if not, just like help them have an awareness that, hey, maybe somebody next to them could be going through something, and just to be more kind. And, you know, we all have bad days.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we say things, we do things that are not beneficial for us, for the people around us. But like, as long as you have good intentions, we're getting a little bit closer. And it's such a dark world. Like, we are in like one of the worst, I think, one of the worst time frames, where there's a lot of like division, separation, which is kind of the same. And like, everyone's angry, everyone's upset, everyone wants to blame somebody, something. And it's like, why can't we just find some peace? And I know this is so hard to wrap around, right? When it's like, oh, you feel like there's injustice, there's unfairness, you've been mistreated, you've been abused, you've been hurt, you like want revenge, you want like what's rightfully yours. And I get that, I do. But if you continue having that, you're never going to heal, you're never going to move past your past, and you're not going to get anywhere. You're just filling yourself with more hatred, more revenge, and just more entitlement in some sense as well, which is why like there's so much chaos in the world. Nobody's trying to understand each other anymore. Nobody is communicating to connect, to hear, to listen, to understand, to go through something together, to support. Like, all of the things that makes us human, we are no longer doing. And like, you know, I have 2 dogs, and I see that like they connect better than humans do. And I mean, like, there are some, obviously, like, not every dog likes each other. Not every dog, or not any animal likes other animals, right? But when you see one animal with another animal getting along, you're just kind of like, we're all human beings and we can't even get along when like maybe a bird and a cat are like best friends, and you're just like, how? Like, they're so different that like you can't see them connect, but they connect. Why, as human beings, can't we find some peace, some happiness, allow ourselves to just enjoy life? And I'm not saying ignore the suffering and have toxic positivity, because that's a thing too. You don't just ignore the problems and think it's going to go away. It gets worse.
Yeah.
But sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
No, it's okay, it's all good. No, I thank you for sharing like what your podcast is about, and what it's called, and sort of like why you started really doing it. And I agree with you in the sense of like, I think all of us are looking for a sense of belonging. All of us are looking for some sort of connection. And I think that there's so much connectedness when it comes to devices and when it comes to the internet and social media, that sometimes we just completely stop checking in with ourselves and like really checking in with each other. And I think that your podcast and this podcast that I've started as well are just examples of like how we can just sit down and have like an open, honest, vulnerable conversation with each other. And like you said, it's not about like my way is the right way, you need to do this. It's just about here's one example of how somebody has faced some struggles and how they've started to evolve. And maybe you can learn something from it, and maybe you don't. Maybe, you know, the things that we share here today, you're going to try and they don't necessarily work for you. And that's okay. But if it allows you to hear just one more story of another person around the world being courageous and sharing, what they've been through, then maybe it'll help you just be a little bit more kind. And it's natural for us to judge, like our brains literally are programmed to do it. But if hearing more stories like this allow you to like see that judgment and then push it to the side and have like an open mind with the person in front of you, like if that happens more and more often, then that's a win, right? Like that's a huge thing. And it opens the door for conversation and for understanding, like you were talking about. And ultimately, hopefully it's more meaningful connection between one another, because I think that is like such a key to life. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was like, we're all here, like we got to help you, like why not just help each other out, right? And this is one of the ways that we can do it, by having a conversation like this.
Yeah, times have changed. Back then we relied on each other tribally to survive. It was humanity against the rest of the world because we were not made to survive. Like there were stronger animals, stronger things that we can't see, things that we could see that just can survive on its own without a community. But us as humans, we need each other. And that's fact. And if we're going to continue separating each other and fighting, when you think about it, this entire world is reliant on each other. Trades, working hard, whether it's farm to grocery store, whether it's big cities to small towns, we're all working together in some sense. And, I do find that Americans, no offense, not every single American,
Canadian,
but
so
Americans,
it's okay.
I know, but for your American listeners, a lot of them don't get to go explore the rest of the world and see the beauty, the suffering, the greatness, and like everything else there is to offer in the world. And when you limit yourself, you have a very small mind of just not understanding the bigger picture. So I feel like, the biggest intention is just kindness, helping people. Which actually, the funny thing is, I'm currently on a long break and I don't have a schedule of like when I'm going to be back, but I am rebranding. I want to get a little bit more niche, and there's a lot of ideas floating. I don't want to get into it just yet because if I'm saying it right now, that means it's solidified. If people are listening and are looking
It
forward
doesn't
to
mean
that
it's
specific,
solidified, but we can have another conversation about brainstorming. It's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good.
But yeah, I in this current time frame, I decided on a break in April. And actually it took for somebody I was dating during that time to tell me like, hey, you need to just take a break, step back, reanalyze, because there came a point where I was so stressed out because I just got a puppy a month ago, and like anyone who have puppies know that like at 7 weeks they're peeing everywhere, they're crying, they're just doing all sorts of things. And I mean, people with kids, they know like the first year's the hardest, and I was not adapting well because I had the older one who didn't like the idea that now I have to share my love and attention to another one, and if anything more, because they just need basic things, and still keep up with like my scheduled expectations of my episodes and whatever else I was creating at the time. So he saw how overwhelmed and stressed I was, and he was like, you're a mental health podcaster. If you can't take a break, you're not setting a good example for other people who are going through mental health issues and like see that you're still powering through. They think that you're gonna do that, so they have to do that.
Yeah.
So you're not getting a good example or setting a good example for other people. And I was like, you know what? You're right. He was absolutely right. And I decided I was going to take a break. And the first week I announced that to myself, because saying it out loud is different from like hearing it in your head. Saying it out loud means it's real. And the first week, I was so happy. I just got more work done because I said I was on a break and there was no expectations from me. And I realized that, hey, I love what I do, because there came a point I was just like, am I even enjoying what I'm doing anymore? Because I feel miserable. I just feel like I'm catching up to deadlines every week. And I'm not being creative in my own sense. So yeah, I mean, we're in middle of July now, so it's been 3.5 months, and I'm so much more happier. And for some people, it's actually triggering to see somebody like me just have no plans on returning. And people like knowing, they're like so afraid of the unknown that like my physical presence can be triggering for them. And then they start projecting onto me. They're just like, okay, so when are you going to go back to work? What are you going to do? Are you planning on like going back into the workforce? Because I never created my podcast to be of something to bring in income. And then I realized, okay, this is another wound of mine, like feeling like I don't have any value to add to the world. So that's why I don't feel right to charge people. And that was also like another year of like, and we're still going at this, but yeah, it was another year of like working on my self-worth and understanding that I have more than enough value to offer. It's just I don't see it in myself. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I always go off on tangents, guys. I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. It's all relevant. So I appreciate you you sharing that information. And it's interesting because like I struggle with it myself, and I've had many conversations with my wife about like, oh, I can't just stop. Like I can't just I can't just stop posting episodes. Like I have goals to meet. And same thing. It's like, yeah, but you're a mental health podcaster. So like if you can't admit and be vulnerable about it and be like, hey, listen, I'm overwhelmed right now and I need to pause. Like if you're not able to say that, then like you're not like living the life that you are displaying. You know what I mean? Like you're not staying true to the values that you keep talking about. So like think about it that way. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're kind of right. So I've been through the same sort of conversations before with my wife, and they're really helpful to have somebody else kind of check in and check you, to be honest, and to be able to hold you accountable to those sorts of things. In terms of your podcast, Life with Tia Wolfe, I'm assuming that it's on all podcasting platforms, so we're definitely going to put the link in the description below so that everybody can check it out, because even though you're rebranding, I know that your previous episodes are still available, so people can definitely check those out. As we wrap up here, I want to ask you one sort of closing question.
Okay.
I'm going to throw you on the spot again, just like I did at the beginning. But the closing question is really like, obviously you've been through a lot in terms of going through your story, and there were different parts in your life that really allowed you to like really reflect on where you were and kind of get a little bit more intentional about where you wanted to go and how you wanted to operate. And so my question to you is, like, what advice do you have? Like, what's one piece of advice that you have for somebody who is in a similar position, somebody who is kind of a little bit stuck and knows that they want more out of life, but doesn't know where to start? What would be your one piece of advice for somebody in that position?
So I have two things to address.
I said
before
one.
I can.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So I realize, like, for people who want more out of life but haven't taken that step, the first thing they have to look at is like their fears. Because what is it that's holding you back? What is the worst case scenario that you think is going to happen? And maybe it might happen, but then so what? Like, what's going to happen after that? Like, if you've hit rock bottom, there is no more to go down from there. You can only go up. And no matter how much you like stop that slingshot that you're pulling back, will eventually have to let go because there's too much tension, and then you're just shooting forward.
I like that analogy.
So,
and it's like the longer and longer like you wait, the more and more it's being pulled back. So the further you're gonna go in the other direction.
Right. So the other thing is that I realize that not everyone is ready, and everybody has a different threshold.
Mm-hmm.
You can't force that, because I've learned through experience that when people are going through things, all I wanted to do was like be there for them and give them advice and be like, hey, here's all of the things you can try to get yourself out of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've learned is that in the end, it was just backtracking to me. Like, I'm made to be the evil person wanting to help them, because people aren't ready to face that side of them that is holding them back, keeping them where they are at. And like there's little variations of like how and what's causing that, just because everybody has a slightly different lifestyle. But if you can't address the deeper issues of why you have this fear, why you're holding yourself back, because it's not other people. Like, you may be inflicted from other people, like
Mm-hmm.
ideas, reasons why you can't, but like there comes a point that you've decided that you're going to inflict this pain on to you.
Right.
And when you don't want it bad enough, you may think you want more and you want to do more, but you're the only thing that is holding you back. You are your own worst enemy. And maybe, and this is terrible for me to say, but maybe you need to suffer some more. Like, you need to suffer so bad that it hurts. It hurts so bad that you want a change. Because for some people, they do learn just from somebody giving them advice, but a lot of people don't. They need to experience to get wiser, to learn the lessons. And some people go through life being hurt forever. They don't learn the lesson, and they continue those cycles of lessons because they're not willing to see the bigger picture, to work within themselves, to see why they're going through the same thing in different variations.
Mm-hmm.
So going back, it's just figure out what it is that's holding you back, work on that, and then just go do it. Like, I don't want to be the Nike commercial, but like sometimes one of the biggest things that humans do is overthink. And it may not actually be that bad, but because we start thinking about something and then you think about it again and again and again, and over time, something that could have been this small became like a huge problem. And it's all in your head. So check out what it is that's causing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it just you overthinking, or is it a actual wound, a fear, a problem? And figure out how to address it, because if it's a problem, that means it can be fixed. If it's something within you, it's going to take a lot longer. But if you have that willpower, if you really want that change, you're going to do it, because there comes a point that it hurts. And we're in this time frame now that like we're all becoming more sensitive energetically. We feel things that are starting to come up. We can't just keep hiding into our keep hiding our shadows and throwing things under the rug and pretend everything is okay. There is no more space for that in the world we live in now, which is amazing in terms of advancement, but also very dark,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't see the light without going through the dark first.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
That does. Again, a little tangent. No, I'm just playing. No, Tia.
Always.
Tia, thank you so much for those two pieces of advice at the end there, and for sharing your story openly, honestly, and vulnerably. It's going to help somebody out there, and it's just another example of how somebody else has overcome some things in their life to really find something that they're passionate about, something that adds purpose to their life and fulfillment. And it makes me so happy to be able to share this story. So thank you so much for spending some time with me. I look forward to your rebrand. You got to keep me updated and let me know. I'm not putting nothing solidified yet, but you got to let me know when that rebrand is going to be. I don't know if you're doing a relaunch or what, but keep me updated on that and let me know how I can support the show.
It's all up in the air right now, but thank you for having me, Adam. And I just want to let you know that you're doing great work. Like, people who have been following you for a while, like I really, really hope they are inspired by you, because, you know, we have very similar situations that we've gone through, and like it's not easy. And the fact that you want to throw yourself into discomfort to grow, like it's a big deal, and people have no idea how hard that is. So like props to you, props for also launching
Thanks.
this podcast, and like for us to meet at Global Podfest, it's like a blessing. And like, you know, I really hope one day that I get to meet you and Shelby, because literally you guys sound so amazing. And not just sound, but are. I haven't met Shelby yet, but like listening to her. By the way, I'm plugging this, even though like you guys probably have already listened. But if you haven't, check out his coffee date episodes, because all of you guys, if you guys are young and in a relationship or trying to date, there's some good information, advice that they do that I believe everybody needs to know. Sorry, I know you're plugging me, but I'm plugging you back.
No, it's all good. I appreciate all the kind words. For anybody that does want to check out the coffee dates now, they're episode 28 and 29. I'll link them in the description below so that they're easy to find. So thank you for that plug and for all the kind words. Tia, it's been a pleasure having you on today.